مجمع الأندلس التعليمي، تعلم عصري ملهم بهوية وطنية وقيم إسلامية.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear students of grade 12 in Al-Andalus Secondary School. It's me again, Mr. Osama Abdul Rauf, introducing today's lesson in Unit 8A, Not What It Seems. Today's lesson is grammar and will deal, inshallah, with relative pronouns. But first, let's listen to this verse of the Quran to introduce today's value. Listen carefully.
يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعض الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه واتقوا الله إن الله تواب رحيم.
صدق الله العظيم. And now it's time to study, and let's start by introducing today's objectives. Objective number 1. In this period, inshallah, or in this video, we are going to identify defining and non-defining relative clauses through answering 8 questions in exercise A, student book page 115. The second objective for today is to identify the relative pronouns which, that, and where in defining and non-defining relative clauses in exercise A, student book page 115. And the third objective for today is to complete a dialogue with the correct relative pronouns in exercise E, workbook page 90. And finally, objective number 4 is to use relative pronouns to correctly join 7 sentences in as many ways as possible in exercise B, student book page 115. Let's start our lesson. Before we start doing the exercises, I invite you to watch this video. It may be a little long, but it's very useful, I think. Watch and take notes.
Who, whom, whose, which, that. Let's have a look at where and why we use relative pronouns. We use relative pronouns after a noun. And the reason why we use them is to make it clear which person or thing we're talking about. The part of the sentence that gives the information about the person or the thing is a defining relative clause. For example, the man who lent me the book. The book which I borrowed. The library where we met. Now, let's have a look at which relative pronoun we must use in each case. First of all, for people, we can use who, that, whose, or whom. For example, the man who lent me the book, or the man that lent me the book, or the man whose book I borrowed. Be careful with the relative pronoun whom. This pronoun is only common in formal styles. For example, the man from whom I borrowed the book sounds very formal. It becomes less formal if you put the preposition at the end. The man whom I borrowed the book from. However, it's still quite formal. In modern and spoken English, it is best to use who instead and put the preposition at the end. The man who I borrowed the book from. Okay. For objects, we can use which, that, or whose. For example, the book which I borrowed, or the book that I borrowed. The book which is entitled Peace, or the book that is entitled Peace. The book whose title is Peace. Note that you can also say the book the title of which is Peace, or the book of which the title is Peace. In this case, the noun is always preceded by the definite article the. Okay, and finally, for places, times, and reason, you can use where, when, why, or sometimes that. In informal English, you can use these as relative pronouns. However, in formal English, use which with a preposition. For example, the library where we met is informal, and the library at which we met is formal, written English. The day when or that we met, informal. The day on which we met is formal. The reason why or that I was at the library, that's informal. The reason for which I was at the library is formal. So just note that you can use that instead of when and why, but not instead of where. Right then. A very common question is, can we drop the relative pronoun? In formal written English, it is best not to drop it. However, in informal and spoken English, it is common to drop it, but it is not always possible. So let's have a look at when it is and when it is not possible to drop the relative pronoun. You can drop who, whom, that, and which if the information is related to the object of the sentence, but not when it is related to the subject. For example, the man who or that lent me the book, the man is the subject of the verb lend. Therefore, you cannot drop the relative pronoun. In the sentence, the book which or that is called Peace, book is the subject of the verb is. Therefore, you cannot drop the relative pronoun. However, in the clause, the man who or whom I borrowed the book from, the man is the indirect object for the verb borrow. Therefore, you can drop the relative pronoun. The man I borrowed the book from. Also, in the clause, the book which or that I borrowed, the book is the direct object of the verb borrowed. Therefore, you can drop the relative pronoun. The book I borrowed. Just note that you cannot drop whom when it is next to the preposition. The man from whom I borrowed the book. You cannot drop whose, of which, or where. For example, the man whose book I borrowed, the book the title of which is Peace, the library where I met him. You must not drop these relative pronouns. And finally, you can drop when and why in the same way you can drop that. The day when that I met him, the day I met him. The reason why or that I was at the library, the reason I was at the library. So how about what and how? What and how are not relative pronouns because they cannot come after a noun. They replace a noun and a relative pronoun. What means the thing which. What I read in the book surprised me. How means the manner in which. I still remember how we met. So, what is a non-defining relative clause? A non-defining relative clause gives additional information about the person or the thing. If we eliminate this information from the sentence, the listener still knows who or what we're talking about. In written English, there is always a comma before a non-defining relative clause. Let's look at some examples. The man who lent me the book was the author himself, who you may have heard of. If we drop the last part, who you may have heard of, the sentence is still complete. The man who lent me the book was the author himself. Let's look at another example. The book which I borrowed, which you may have read, is entitled Peace. Let's drop the non-defining clause, which you may have read, and we'll end up with the book which I borrowed is entitled Peace. The sentence is still complete. A final example. The library where we met, where I always borrow books, is the largest in the city. Let's drop the non-defining relative clause, where I always borrow books, and we have a complete sentence. The library where we met is the largest in the city. Note that you cannot use that instead of who or which in non-defining clauses. For example, the man who or that lent me the book was the author himself, who you may have heard of. You cannot use that instead of who in the final clause. Or, the book which or that I borrowed, which you may have read, is entitled Peace. You must not use that in the non-defining clause. Also note that sometimes which gives additional information about the whole sentence instead of just the noun in the sentence. For example, the man who lent me the book was the author.
Thank you for paying attention to such a long video, but I hope it was helpful to you. Now open your student books page 115 to do exercise A. Exercise A, read the sentences and answer the questions that follow. We have here a box and underneath it we have 6 questions. I'll give you some time to pause the video and do the 6 questions yourselves. Good luck. Here are the answers. Number 1. What does the pronoun who refer to in each of the sentences? Here is the answer. In the first sentence, who refers to Mr. Lee? Read it again and check. Okay. What about in sentence B? Yes. In the second sentence, it refers to people, and in the third, it refers to the man who. Okay, what about question number 2? In which sentence or sentences does the relative clause provide information which is needed to understand the sentence? What is the clause called? Yes, the answer is sentences B and C, and this is called defining relative clause. Defining relative clauses هي الجمل أو العبارات التي لا يمكن الاستغناء عنها. فهي تعطي معلومات هامة نحتاجها حتى نفهم الجملة. Question 3. In which sentences does the relative clause provide extra information about what it refers to? What's the clause called? Yes, an answer could be A. Sentence A gives extra information. This is called a non-defining relative clause. Non-defining relative clause هي العبارة التي يمكن الاستغناء عنها فهي تعطي معلومات إضافية لا تؤثر في الفهم العام للجملة. What about question 4? How is this indicated by the punctuation? Of course, here means sentence A, which has a non-defining relative clause. Yes, to punctuate a sentence that contain a relative clause, we always use commas to separate a non-defining relative clause from the main clause. Okay? يعني بنستخدم الفواصل الكوماز قبل وبعد الجملة الاعتراضية التي يمكن حذفها ولا تؤثر في المعنى ولكنها تعطي معنى أو معلومة إضافية. Question 5. In which sentence or sentences can the relative pronoun be omitted? Yes, an answer could be as follows. It can be omitted in C because it refers to the object of the verb. So when the relative pronoun refers to the object يعني عندما يرجع الضمير إلى المفعول فيمكن حذفه. مثلا في الجملة رقم C or letter C, the man who I was introduced to, it could be said the man I was introduced to. Okay? Question 6. In which sentence or sentences can the relative pronoun be replaced by that? Yes, in sentences B and C, we cannot use that in the place of relative pronouns in non-defining relative clauses. Now let's move to the second part of exercise A with the second box. We have here two questions, number 7 and 8. And again, I'll give you some time to pause the video and do questions 7 and 8 yourselves and then play the video again to check your answers. Here are the answers. Number 7. Can whom and whose be omitted? Whom cannot be omitted because there is a preposition before it. Read the sentence again. The woman about whom. So when you have about, with, to, before whom, you can never omit whom. يعني كلمة whom دائما أو في بعض الأحيان يأتي قبلها حرف جر مع مثل to whom, with whom, about whom, and in this case it can never be omitted. Also, whose can never be omitted. كلمة whose بمعنى الذي له للملكية لا يمكن حذفها أبدا. Question 8. How can we write sentence A in a more informal style? Sentence A is that's the woman about whom I told you. It could be informal, more informal like this. That's a woman who I told you about. So using whom is more formal than using who. Now let's move to the third part of exercise A. In this part we have 3 questions, question 9, 10 and 11. Again, take your time, pause the video, do the questions and then play the video again to check your answers. Here are the answers. Question 9. What does which in each of the 2 sentences refer to? Yes, in the first sentence it refers to the t-shirt, and in the second sentence it refers to the fact that the t-shirts at the souvenirs shop were very cheap. Okay? What about number 10? In which of the 2 sentences could the pronoun be replaced by that? Yes, in the first sentence because the relative clause is defining. So when the relative clause is defining يعني محددة, you can exchange which with that. Okay, let's move to question 11. In which of the two sentences could which be omitted? يعني متى في أي من هاتين الجملتين يمكن حذف كلمة which? Yes, the answer is in the first sentence because it refers to the object of the sentence and the relative clause is defining. Now let's move to the last part of exercise A with 3 questions, 12, 13 and 14. Again, pause the video, do the questions and play the video again to check your answers. Here are the answers. 12. Which of the two sentences is more formal? Yes, sentence A, because in formal language, prepositions appear at the beginning of the relative clause. In which? Okay, what about question 13? In which sentence can which be omitted? Yes, sentence B, which can be omitted if it refers to the object of the sentence. يعني لو كان يقصد بها المفعول جملة. The relative clause is defining and if the preposition appears at the end of the relative clause. The last question in exercise A, question 14. How would the sentences be if where was used instead? Here is the answer. This is the drawer where I keep my passport. Thank you very much for your attention and for your good work. Now it's time for more practice, so I'll ask you to open your workbooks page 90 to do exercise E. Exercise E. Complete the dialogues with who, which, whose, when, or where. If they can be omitted, put them in brackets. Now it's your turn to pause the video and do the exercise yourself and then play the video again to check your answers. Here are the answers. Number 1, yes, where? The restaurant where I have been trying to book a table for a month. Number 2, yes, whose? Number 3, yes, which? Number 4, yes, again, which? And finally, number 5, yes, which? The time has come for CR questions, يعني الأسئلة المقالية. So again, open your student books page 115 to do exercise B. Exercise B. Join the sentences using who, which, that, whose, whom, or where in as many ways as possible. Please pause the video, do the exercise, and then play the video again to check your answers. Here are the answers. Number 1. Yusuf is a new colleague. I went for dinner with him last night. This question has 3 possible answers. 1. Yusuf is a new colleague with whom I went for dinner last night. Or Yusuf is a new colleague who I went for dinner with last night. Or Yusuf with who or with whom I went for dinner last night is a new colleague. Okay, now let's move to check question number 2. Linda Hansen was my art teacher at school. She has an exhibition at the local gallery. Question number 2 has 2 possible answers. Number 1, Linda Hansen, who was my art teacher at school, has an exhibition at the local gallery. Or Linda Hansen, who has an exhibition at the local gallery, was my art teacher at school. Number 3, question number 3. Max got a job in advertising. That was a pleasant surprise. This answer has only one possible answer, which is Max got a job in advertising, which was a pleasant surprise. Again, let's move to questions 4, 5, 6, and 7. And as usual, I'll ask you to pause the video, try to do the exercises or the questions yourself, and then play the video again to check your answers. Here are the answers. Number 4. The company is owned by Andrew Olivetti. His family started in 1934. Yes, this sentence has only one answer. The company is owned by Andrew Olivetti, whose family started in 1934. What about question 5? Let's read it. The mountain gorilla is one of the most endangered species. It lives in Africa. This question has two possible answers. Number 1, the mountain gorilla, which is one of the most endangered species, live in Africa. Or the mountain gorilla, which lives in Africa, is one of the most endangered species. What about question 6? Let's go to room 25. The examination will be held there. This question has 3 possible answers. Number 1, let's go to room 25 where the examination will be held. Or, let's go to room 25 in which the examination will be held. Or, let's go to room 25 which the examination will be held in. And finally, number 7, I was invited to a lecture last Saturday. I totally forgot about it. Here we have an answer. Last Saturday, I was invited to a lecture, which or that I totally forgot about. Thank you very much, and I hope your answers were all correct. Now it's time for some fun. Here, I have prepared some games for you to play. You only need to scan the codes here and have fun enjoying and practicing today's grammatical rule. Thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye. See you later.
مجمع الأندلس التعليمي، تعلم عصري ملهم بهوية وطنية وقيم إسلامية.